Hello, I'm Esther Githo-Ewart. It's Thursday, March 24th. This is Africa 54.
NATO leaders meet in Brussels as pressure mounts for the West to take stronger military action in support of Ukraine. Remembering the first female U.S. Secretary of State, Madeline Albright, following her death from cancer at 84. And a former banker in Ghana conquers her fears and pursues her dreams at the Skatepark.
We begin our broadcast in Brussels, where Western leaders are meeting throughout the day on Thursday to discuss their short and long-term response to Russia's month-old invasion of Ukraine. Western nations are expected to again warn Russian President Vladimir Putin that his country will pay a heavy financial cost for invading Ukraine. U.S. President Joe Biden is attending the unprecedented one-day trio of NATO, G7 and EU summits. The hectic day of meetings to maintain Western unity started at NATO headquarters, where the Transatlantic Defense Alliance's leaders will agree to ramp up military forces on Europe's eastern flank. Alarmed by the prospect that Russia might escalate the war with Ukraine after a difficult month-long battle, the 30 nations of NATO are also likely to agree to send Kyiv equipment to defend against biological, chemical, and nuclear attacks. A senior U.S. defense official says that Ukrainians have pushed Russian forces back to about 55 kilometers east and northeast of Kyiv. Only a day earlier, they were about 20 to 30 kilometers away. The United Nations says more than 3.6 million refugees have fled Ukraine since Russia launched its invasion 1 month ago. Another 6.5 million people have been displaced from their homes within the country. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says the alliance is establishing 4 new battle groups on its eastern flank as part of its additional defensive measures since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The combat-ready units are set to deploy to Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania and Slovakia, bringing the total number of NATO battle groups on its eastern flank to 8. Standing by live at NATO headquarters with more on President Biden and the Western leaders' meetings on Thursday is VOA White House correspondent Anita Powell. Anita, update us on today's activities.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, Esther, it's been a very busy day here in Brussels. Behind me is NATO headquarters, and as we speak, President Biden is meeting with members of the European Union, as you mentioned. Earlier today, he met here at NATO headquarters with NATO members and also members of the G7. He even found a little bit of time to speak privately with Japan's Prime Minister over North Korea's recent missile launch. So it's been a busy day, and of course, Ukraine has been the topic of the day. Western nations are still trying to figure out how to fend off this Russian advance on Ukraine, which it must be noted is ending its first month today.
Anita, President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine addressed NATO members. And what were the takeaways from his speech, and how did the White House react to his address today?
That's a really interesting question, Esther, because what Volodymyr Zelensky said and how the White House characterized it were actually two very different takes on the speech. Let me start with what Zelensky said. He basically called NATO's bluff. He said, you have 20,000 tanks. We just want 1% of these to have or to buy. We want anti-ship missiles. We want tanks. We want more armaments to help us fend it off. And then he said, throwing down the gauntlet, as it were, you are the most powerful military and defensive alliance in the world. Prove it. Now, the White House was quick to note, and this was their takeaway from it, that he did not reiterate his demand for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. I think that it's been clear that NATO and the White House have said that's not going to happen. And he also didn't reiterate his demand for NATO membership. But he did make a number of demands, and he really did call NATO leaders. One could even say that he criticized them for their inaction and called them on their lack of action in this conflict. So it was a very powerful speech, and it really probably put NATO leaders on guard.
Anita, we just mentioned that it's 1 month anniversary since Russia invaded Ukraine. We've also heard the UN saying there have been 3.6 million refugees fleeing the country. What is the White House plan to respond to this crisis?
So today, President Biden's administration announced that the U.S. will soon take in 100,000 refugees from Ukraine. These are going to be people who largely have family already in the U.S. But this is a huge number. This is an almost tenfold increase from the refugees who were admitted to the U.S. last year. There were about 11,000. So this is going to have not just powerful effects in Ukraine, but also in the United States. It could potentially change the fabric of American society, especially as we know from the African experience, the majority of displaced people never return home. So these are 100,000 people who are looking at a new life, a new future, a new country, a new nationality, a new reality. And that's a very powerful statement coming from the U.S. And I'm sure that many Americans and many Ukrainians will feel the effects of that soon.
Anita, thanks. VOA White House correspondent Anita Powell reporting live from NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. Henry Ridgwell reports from NATO headquarters as calls are growing for the West to take stronger military action in support of Ukraine.
The civilian toll of Russia's invasion grows by the day. If the killing continues, the West will have a moral obligation to get involved, says Fabrice Pottier, a former head of policy planning at NATO.
We could prevent those massacres and those possible deaths if NATO were to be willing to actually take on a little bit more risk.
What could that risk involve? Pottier says NATO could effectively blockade Russia.
I think we should control more access on the Baltic and the Black Seas, especially the Baltic is critical to Russian trade. 70% of Russia's trade go via the Baltic. Obviously, they will not let that happen easily, but I think we are geared, we have the plans, we have the capabilities to do so.
NATO should play Russia at its own game, says Pottier.
We can do also much more in terms of basically cyber operations. So the hybrid type warfare, which Putin has been associated with for some years, but where actually we also have assets. And in order to disrupt, actually, again, the Putin war machine.
US President Joe Biden last week announced an additional $800 million in security assistance for Ukraine, including Stinger anti-aircraft systems and armed drones. Former US ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker, also the US Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations until 2019, says more weapons are needed.
More air defense systems, including those that operate at higher altitudes. More shore-to-ship systems to take out some of the Russian naval ships in the Black Sea. I do believe that the MiG-29s and other fighter aircraft should be provided. We're not quite there yet. I understand the arguments against a no-fly zone, but I think we should not take it off the table.
Volker says the supply of military equipment to Ukraine needs improved coordination.
And NATO could provide something of a clearinghouse function, and it could provide an assurance of delivery by creating a safe place for that in Poland and ensuring that it arrives successfully in Ukraine.
Western leaders fear any escalation could lead to direct confrontation between NATO and Russian forces and a conflict between nuclear-armed powers. But some argue NATO must take on more risk now or face a far greater threat if Russia succeeds in capturing Ukraine. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News at NATO headquarters in Brussels.
U.S. officials say members of Russia's military have committed war crimes in Ukraine and vows that those responsible will be held accountable. Speaking to VOA, Stephen Rapp, a former U.S. ambassador at large for war crimes issues in the Office of Global Criminal Justice, talked about allegations of war crimes committed by the Russian military and what it takes to get convictions in a court of law.
I think that the pattern of what they've done in Mariupol is totally inconsistent with a military attack operation. So I think that in particular is a war crime. When we get to other situations, just because civilians are killed, horrific as it is, that doesn't in and of itself prove a war crime. You have to be able to show either intention or indiscriminate attacks or disproportionate attacks. And those are always scales of gray in a way, and proving in a criminal court requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So if you're going to draw inferences, there can be no inference reasonably that can be drawn that points to innocence. But when you see something like Mariupol, if all of that were now presented to a court, I'm quite confident that we get war crimes convictions.
That was Stephen Rapp, former U.S. ambassador at large for war crimes issues in the Office of Global Criminal Justice. Ukrainian refugees are still flowing into Poland. Many are coming through border checkpoints and staying in camps before boarding buses and trains to reach their destinations. At the camps and stations, they are finding volunteers who help them with some basic needs. VOA's Miriam Gawe reports.
We are here at the center of Kozoa Delina. This is the center, refugee center, that the refugees have been taken from the border to here. And when they get registered, once they finish, they are taking them to another location to the city to migrate to another community. And right here, as you can see, the security is very high. We are not allowed to get inside because of their privacy, but we were told there is women and children inside there are resting. And not only the buses which are taking the refugees, but you will see Good Samaritans are walking around here ready to take the refugees from Ukraine. Kochova camp, just a few kilometers from the Ukrainian-Polish border, is a transit point for refugees from Ukraine. As soon as they step out of the buses, they are greeted by volunteers who provide them with food, water, and other necessities. Besides Polish volunteers, there are also organizations and individuals from all over the world who have come to assist the refugees. 2 volunteers from Germany are among those who have come to Poland, bringing along contributions from people in their hometown.
I was organizing the thing, so we collected with Facebook in the home city, and within a few hours over 100 people came over and gave us a lot of food, a lot of clothes, and also a little bit of donations. And with this money we can be here. Like, we're not getting paid, we just use it for the fuel. It's volunteering. But it's nice because we have so much at home. And we just have it because we took so much from Africa, we took so much from all the colonized countries. So we have to give something back.
There are buses transporting people from Kochova refugee camp to the main train station in Przemyśl. This train station is a major transit point for refugees. From here, they board trains to other cities in Poland and even to other neighboring countries. Daria, a music theory teacher from Ukraine, is waiting with her 2 sons for a train to Sweden. She wanted to stay in Ukraine and help, but says she had to think about the safety of her sons.
My husband is in Ukraine. He stays in Ukraine, protect his country. We decided to leave because I worry about their lives, you know. I don't think about my life, about myself. I have a kid, so I have to think about them, how to protect them, you know.
There are many volunteers at the train station. Some are providing accommodation for women and children while they wait. Others are serving warm meals at the platform. Sasha came with her family from Austin, Texas, as soon as she heard about the situation at the borders.
I just came with my family to volunteer and help out anywhere I can. My family speaks Russian, and so we felt like we were uniquely qualified to come because we can translate.
Many volunteers have come on their own to help in whatever way they can.
It's hard to imagine where they will go from here and how they will find jobs and when they will be able to return and what their homes will be like when they return. And so it seems like a problem that we can look at right now, but is still going to be a problem for most of these people in a few years.
As she waits for the train, Daria expresses the pain she feels from what is happening to her country.
It feels horrible, because one crazy guy came to my home and destroyed everything. Destroy somebody's houses and destroy somebody's life, you know? It's horrible feelings.
But still, she has hope that one day she'll be able to return to her home. Mary Mgawe, VOA News, Przemysl, Poland.
The death toll from Wednesday's attack in central Somalia, in which a parliamentary election candidate was killed, has risen to more than 30, according to a regional leader. Amina Mohammed, a vocal critic of the government, was killed by a suicide bomber in the city of Beledweyne, around 300 kilometers north of Mogadishu, according to witnesses and relatives. Having grown up during Somalia's civil war, she had entered politics to help rebuild her country. Mohammed was one of 821 female lawmakers in Somalia.
Yeah, it was there were attacks in Beledweyne, 2 of them in the center of the town. About 30 people were killed. Among them was Amina Mohammed, one of the Somali prominent women activists and a former parliament member who was running for re-election. And her killing has created a lot of talk in the streets of Mogadishu and in the Somali political arena, and linking the killing with political assassination, although it's not clear. Al-Shabaab has already claimed the responsibility of the killing, but Amina was so prominent and running for election of her seat, and she was also favorable by clan elders and the local people and also many Somali politicians, because she was very vocal for the killing of former Somali intelligence worker Ikran, who was killed by Al-Shabaab, according to the government officials. So she was prominent actually, and her killing was one of the attacks in Beledweyne. And it's not clear if she was the target, but some analysts say she was the target in one of the attacks, because she was heading to the hospital after the first bomb blast in a government headquarters in Beledweyne, central Somalia.
That was VOA Somali service reporter Mohammed Olad. Human Rights Watch is urging Ethiopia to probe an airstrike on a school in the war-torn Tigray region that killed dozens as an apparent war crime. The rights watchdog says 3 bombs were dropped on January 7th on a school sheltering displaced Tigrayans in the town of Dedebit, reportedly killing at least 57 civilians and wounding more than 42 others. The WHO Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus says the agency has now been granted permission to send aid to Ethiopia's Tigray region, but so far very little amount of supplies have been delivered. He is urging the Ethiopian government to end a blockade that has made it difficult for humanitarian organizations to assist the needy.
Last week I spoke about the humanitarian disaster in Tigray, and that WHO is still waiting for permission to send an additional 95 metric tons of medical supplies. Since then, permission has been granted. If we can deliver these supplies safely, they will help people in desperate need. But much more is needed. So far, only 4% of the needs for health supplies have been delivered to Tigray. That is insignificant. The region has been under siege for almost 500 days, with dire shortages of fuel and food. People are starving to death. Actually, giving them food is more important than medicine. We continue to call on Ethiopia and Eritrean governments to end the blockade.
That was WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. Still to come, a female icon has died. We'll have a report.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Mudu, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
Madeline Albright, the first female U.S. Secretary of State, is being remembered at her home and abroad following her death from cancer at 84 Wednesday.
As she pressed former U.S. President Bill Clinton's administration into action against Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic over war crimes in the Balkans, Albright would harken back to her own childhood as a refugee from war-torn Europe. World leaders recalled how Albright's personal history helped inspire her professional passion as they eulogized America's first female Secretary of State. Prior to beginning a 4-year stint as America's top diplomat in 1996, Albright was Clinton's ambassador to the United Nations, where the current U.S. ambassador remembered her as a mentor and trailblazer.
Secretary Albright was a mentor. She was my boss, both as Secretary of State. I worked with her in Georgetown. She was a colleague, and she was a friend over several decades. She was a trailblazer and a luminary, and she was the first woman to serve as Secretary of State. She left an indelible mark on the world and on the United Nations. Our country and our United Nations are stronger for her service. I always would say she used to talk about the pins she wore. I always wore her on my shoulder.
As Secretary of State, Albright was the highest-ranking woman in the history of the United States government. President Joe Biden ordered flags at the White House and other federal buildings and grounds to be flown at half-staff until March 27. Former President Barack Obama awarded Albright the Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, saying her life was an inspiration to all Americans. Clara Frank, Washington.
For more perspective on Albright, I'm joined live via Skype from Bethesda, Maryland, by VOA News Center Executive Producer Steve Reddish. Steve, Albright was the first woman U.S. Secretary of State. Give us some insight on her accomplishments.
Madeline Albright was Madam Secretary. If Hollywood was putting out a movie, she was perfectly cast as the first woman to be the nation's top diplomat. About as direct as a diplomat could be. She was born in the former Czechoslovakia, as heard in the previous report. As Europe was careening toward war, she fled her home twice, once from the Nazis and another time from Yugoslavia, coming to the United States. And that shaped her perspective, her worldview. And it showed as she came up through the diplomatic ranks, U.S. Secretary of, the first Secretary of State. She was an advocate for expanding NATO. It's interesting that her death comes as Russia is invading Ukraine because of that expansion, as a result of that expansion.
Steve, what an icon. Now, the fourth day, Steve, of the Senate confirmation hearings on the nomination of Federal Appeals Court Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to serve as an Associate Justice on the Supreme Court is still ongoing today, Thursday. She was grilled by Republican senators on Wednesday. How is it looking for her to be confirmed as the first black woman on the Supreme Court?
She's going through a political gauntlet in her confirmation hearings. All nominees go through a gauntlet of sorts. This seems to be a little bit more focused on her record against sex offenders and pedophiles. And it seems to be a Republican attempt to try and raise various different cultural and wedge issues. But no matter what's going to happen, Democrats have a one-vote majority in the Senate. And as her nomination goes forward, it is, unless there's an unforeseen circumstance that comes up, it is likely that she will be the first black woman to be a U.S. Supreme Court justice.
Steve will be following up with you in a few days. Thanks. Steve Reddish is a VOA's News Center executive producer. A Ghanaian woman gave up a job in banking to pursue her passion for skateboarding and now teaches the extreme sports to women and girls at Ghana's only skate park. David Doyle has more.
A year ago, Harmony Bataka quit her banking job to pursue her love of skateboarding. Her family objected. Skateboarding is a fringe sport in West Africa. Even more so if you're a woman.
I enjoyed skateboarding, like every bit of it, you know, and it made me feel really, really good.
But Bataka wouldn't swerve from her passion. The 27-year-old lived off her savings while she and other local skateboarders built Ghana's first skate park.
I just wanted to, like, be free and then, you know, do what I love. Sometimes I feel like it's really necessary and it's really important. Otherwise, this world will break you, you know.
The Freedom Skate Park was completed in December with support from Wonders Around the World, an NGO that builds skate parks in developing countries, and the late Louis Vuitton designer Virgil Abloh, whose parents were Ghanaian immigrants. It was also coordinated by local extreme sports collective Surf Ghana. Through them, Bataka, who previously didn't know any female skateboarders, discovered the Skate Gal Club.
Well, it was just more than skateboarding, you know. We would like talk about other things, mental health, cooking, you know, gardening and all those things. And I really felt comfortable. And that's what Skate Gal Club is all about.
Today, Bataka teaches her passion to other women and girls, including Lila. Despite having only skated for a few months, the 4-year-old has already conquered one of the park's biggest ramps. Her mother Miriam says it's important for girls to see each other doing sports largely associated with boys.
And she even told me last time, like, oh, as a girl, can I do this? Or as a girl, can I do that? I was like, yes, Mama, you can do anything. Like, literally, that's one thing I keep telling her every day. You can do anything.
Just 17% of the world's weekly skateboarders were women in 2018, according to data from Grand View Research. Bataka hopes women-only sessions at the skate park will encourage Ghanaian women to give it a go.
You just need to kill the fear. I don't know how to explain it, but it just, once you fall, okay, you already have a feel of the worst thing that could happen.
She says the lessons she's learned are priceless, that through effort and commitment you will see results, and that you should never give up.
Don't give up. David Doe of Reuters filed that report. And that's our show for today. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.